I always knew my brother Adam was the favorite. You could see it in the way our mom would fuss over him for every little thing. If Adam's toy broke, it was a tragedy. She'd sit with him for hours, consoling him, telling him how sensitive and special he was. Me? If I so much as teared up over something, I'd get, "Stop being dramatic, Ethan. It's not a big deal." At some point, I stopped expecting her to care. It wasn't worth the disappointment. Adam was their golden child. Mom adored him because he was sensitive, and Dad pinned all his dreams on him, hoping Adam would become the kind of success he never was. Dad always wanted to be an architect but never got past his second year of college. Adam was supposed to fulfill that dream. And me? I was Ethan, the kid who stayed out of trouble, got good grades, and didn't need much. They didn't have to worry about me, so they didn't. I think I started noticing the difference when we hit high school. I was the one acing exams, winning science fairs, and earning scholarships. Adam was scraping by with CS and BS, but you'd think he was the second coming the way they praised him. When I got a full scholarship to study engineering, I thought, finally, this will make them proud. I still remember standing in the kitchen, holding the acceptance letter, practically vibrating with excitement. Mom glanced at it, gave a half-hearted smile, and said, "That's nice, honey. Can you help Adam with his college applications later?" I don't know why I expected anything different. Adam could trip over his own feet, and Mom would cheer like he'd won an Olympic medal. But it wasn't just about school. It was everything. When I started dating my girlfriend, Emily, in senior year, I thought maybe they'd care enough to meet her. She was amazing, kind, smart, and funny in a way that made you want to be around her. She worked part-time at a bakery to save for college and still managed to stay at the top of her class. But when I brought her up, Mom barely looked up from her crossword puzzle. High school relationships don't last, Ethan. Don't get too serious. That stung. I wanted them to see Emily the way I did, to understand how much she meant to me. But they didn't. They didn't even ask about her. Meanwhile, every girl Adam dated was paraded around like royalty. Mom made them homemade meals. Dad would ask about their hobbies, and they'd all laugh around the dinner table like old friends. I couldn't help but sit there and wonder why Emily wasn't good enough for them. But Emily and I made it work. After high school, I went off to college on my scholarship, while she stayed behind to work and save money. We did the long-distance thing for 2 years, and it wasn't easy. There were late-night calls, tearful goodbyes, and moments when I wondered if it was worth it. But every time I saw her smile or heard her laugh, I knew it was. The summer before my senior year, I proposed. It wasn't some grand, extravagant thing. I'd saved up for a modest ring, and we went for a walk in the park near her apartment. I knelt down on one knee, my heart pounding, and asked her to marry me. She cried, said yes, and hugged me so tight I thought I might pass out. For the first time in years, it felt like my life was finally coming together. To my surprise, my parents seemed happy for us. Mom started asking Emily about wedding plans, and Dad even mentioned helping with the costs. It was like they'd finally started to see me, not as the kid who didn't need attention, but as someone worth celebrating. I should have known better. Thanksgiving rolled around, and I was excited to share updates about the wedding, my internship, and everything else that was finally going right. Emily was going to come by later that weekend, and I couldn't wait to show my family how well we were doing. But that morning, I got a text from her. "Can we talk? Starbucks, urgent." I stared at the screen, a sinking feeling settling in my gut. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe just stress about the wedding or her job. But when I walked into that Starbucks and saw her sitting in the corner, clutching her coffee cup like it was the only thing holding her together, I knew. She didn't look up as I sat down. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said it. "Ethan, I'm pregnant. And it's Adam's." It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My brain couldn't process what she just said. "What?" I managed to choke out, hoping I'd misheard her. Tears started streaming down her face as she repeated it. She told me how Adam had started showing up at her bakery over the summer, talking about how lonely she must feel with me away, how one thing led to another. She kept apologizing, but I didn't hear most of it. Her words blurred together, and all I could think was, this can't be real. This can't be happening. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just got up, walked out of the cafe, and drove straight to my parents' house. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might break. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun had set, and the warm light spilling from the windows felt like a cruel joke. Inside, Adam was sitting on the couch, his head down, shoulders slumped, looking like a scolded child. Mom hovered over him, rubbing his back and whispering soothing words. Dad stood near the window, arms crossed, staring out like none of this concerned him. The whole scene felt surreal, like I'd walked into some nightmare version of my life. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. Mom turned to me, her expression tense. "Ethan, let's talk about this calmly." Calmly. She wanted calm after her precious golden child had blown up my life. My laugh was bitter, almost unrecognizable. "I want to hear it from him," I said, staring at Adam. "Say something." Adam didn't even lift his head. He mumbled something I couldn't make out, and Mom jumped in, her voice defensive. "Adam's taking responsibility. He's going to be a father, Ethan. This is a big step for him." Her words hit me like a slap. A big step? He destroys my life, and she thinks this is some kind of milestone to celebrate? I turned to Dad, hoping he'd have something to say, but he just sighed. "Mistakes happen, Ethan. If you love Emily, you need to let her go. She and Adam are having a child. It's time to move on. Let her go." Just like that, they expected me to hand over my fiancée, my future, to Adam without a second thought. My voice shook as I said, "You've always chosen him. Every time. Well, you can keep him. I'm done." I turned and walked to my old room, grabbed a suitcase, and started throwing my things into it. Mom followed me, begging me to stop, but I didn't listen. When I reached the door, she stood in my way, tears in her eyes. "This is your family, Ethan." "No," I said, meeting her gaze. "This is his family. You stopped being mine a long time ago." I pushed past her and didn't look back. After leaving my parents' house that night, I didn't drive straight back to my apartment. Instead, I just drove. The roads were dark and mostly empty, which suited me. My thoughts were loud enough to fill the silence. I kept replaying everything over and over. Emily's tearful confession, Adam's cowardly silence, my parents' complete indifference to what I was feeling. By the time I finally stopped the car, I realized I was in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner just outside town. I went inside, ordered coffee, and sat in a corner booth, staring at the chipped tabletop. The waitress probably thought I was some kind of zombie. I barely touched the coffee. It wasn't that I didn't want to cry or scream. I did, but nothing came. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out all my insides and left me with nothing but a shell. When I got back to my apartment hours later, the first thing I did was delete every photo of Emily on my phone. The happy moments, the memories I thought were unshakable, they all went into the trash with a few swipes of my finger. Then I blocked her number, along with Adam's and my parents. If they wanted to fix this, they could do it without me. The next few days were a blur. I threw myself into work and classes, not because I wanted to, but because it was the only thing keeping me upright. My professors noticed my sudden shift into overdrive. I went from dependable student to guy who lives in the lab. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just needed something, anything, to keep me distracted. One of my professors, Dr. Bennett, pulled me aside after class one day. "You've been putting in a lot of extra hours lately," he said, his tone cautious. "Everything okay?" I almost laughed. If I started telling him everything that had happened, he'd probably regret asking. "I'm fine," I said instead, "just trying to get ahead." He gave me this skeptical look but didn't push. "Well, if you're interested, I'm starting a new research project on network security. I could use an assistant. It's unpaid, but the experience will look good on your resume." I agreed immediately. I didn't care about the resume boost. I just needed something to focus on. Dr. Bennett's project turned out to be exactly what I needed. The work was intense, involving long hours of coding and problem solving, but for the first time in weeks, my mind wasn't consumed by Adam and Emily. It was consumed by algorithms and firewalls. In the meantime, I completely cut myself off from anyone who might drag me back into that mess. Friends asked why I wasn't bringing Emily around anymore, why I wasn't talking about the wedding. I'd just shrug and say, "It's over. I don't want to talk about it." Most people respected that, though a few pushed for details. I didn't give them any. The last thing I needed was pity. A few weeks after I cut ties with my family, my Aunt Karen reached out. She was my mom's older sister, someone I'd always liked but hadn't been particularly close to. Her text was short. "I heard what happened. I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm here if you need anything." I ignored the message at first. What was the point? But a few days later, I caved and called her. Karen wasn't like my parents. She didn't try to minimize what I was feeling or make excuses for Adam. She just listened while I unloaded everything. By the time I finished, I was shaking, my hands gripping the phone like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. Karen sighed. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve any of that. Your parents, they've always been blind when it comes to Adam. It's not fair, and it's not your job to fix it." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I've been trying to prove myself to my parents, to show them I was worth as much as Adam. Hearing someone else acknowledge how unfair it all was felt like validation I didn't realize I needed. We talked for a while longer, and by the time I hung up, I felt a little lighter. Not fixed, not even close, but lighter. Life moved on, slowly but surely. I finished the semester with top marks, thanks to all the extra hours I'd put in, and Dr. Bennett's project caught the attention of a cybersecurity startup. They offered me an entry-level position before I'd even graduated. The pay wasn't great, but it came with equity in the company, and it felt like the start of something real. I moved to a new city for the job, 5 hours away from everything and everyone I'd left behind. My apartment was tiny, a studio with barely enough room for a bed and a desk, but it was mine. I furnished it with cheap secondhand stuff, but even that felt like a luxury. I was building something on my own, and for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of myself. Work was hard but rewarding. The hours were long, and the pressure was intense, but I thrived on it. The team was small, and we all worked our asses off, knowing that every line of code, every project we completed, brought us one step closer to success. It was exhausting but satisfying in a way that nothing else had ever been. Meanwhile, I didn't hear much from my family, which was exactly how I wanted it. Aunt Karen would text me now and then with updates, usually short messages about how my parents were doing or some new scheme Adam had cooked up. I didn't ask for the updates, but I didn't tell her to stop either. About 6 months after I left, she called me with news I wasn't surprised to hear. "Adam flunked out of school," she said. "He's back home with your parents." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to laugh at how predictable it all was, but another part of me just felt tired. Of course, he'd flunked out. Adam had spent his whole life coasting on the idea that he was special. The moment he had to actually put in effort, he folded. "He burned through a lot of your dad's savings before he dropped out," Karen continued. "They're not thrilled about it, but you know how your mom is. She's already making excuses for him." I thanked her for the update and hung up, feeling a familiar mix of frustration and relief. Frustration at how nothing had changed, and relief that I wasn't part of it anymore. I had my own life now, and I wasn't going to let them drag me back into theirs. Life in the new city started to feel normal. I poured everything I had into my job, and the company was thriving. We were a scrappy startup at first, but we were building something innovative, something that mattered. Each late night and early morning felt like a step towards something bigger. I wasn't just surviving, I was building a future. I tried not to think about my family, but sometimes it was unavoidable. Aunt Karen still sent me updates from time to time, and even though I didn't ask for them, I always read them. It was like peeking at a car crash you couldn't look away from. One message hit harder than the others. "Your parents sold the house," Karen wrote. "They're renting a small apartment now. Adam burned through most of your dad's savings with some business venture that failed almost immediately. They're struggling, Ethan." I stared at the text for a long time, unsure how to feel. Part of me thought, serves them right. Another part of me felt a faint pang of something I couldn't name. Pity, maybe? Not for Adam, but for my parents. They'd spent their entire lives sacrificing for him, and now they had nothing to show for it. Karen kept me in the loop, whether I wanted her to or not. Over the next few months, she filled me in on everything. Adam had started some ridiculous online business, selling electronics. He'd convinced my parents to fund it, promising them it was a surefire way to make money. Of course, it collapsed within weeks. My dad was furious at first, but as always, my mom swooped in to defend Adam, insisting he just needed more time to figure things out. Meanwhile, I was moving forward. Our company landed its first big contract, and suddenly, we weren't just a startup anymore. We were legitimate, and my role expanded. I started managing a small team, which came with more responsibilities and more stress, but I loved it. The work was challenging, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. One night, after an especially long day, Karen called. I picked up, already bracing myself for whatever update she had this time. "Your dad's in the hospital," she said. "Heart problems." "It's not good, Ethan." I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. I shouldn't have been surprised. Dad's health had been declining for years, thanks to the constant stress of dealing with Adam. But hearing it out loud still felt like a punch to the gut. "Does Mom know you're calling me?" I asked after a moment. "No," Karen admitted. "She wouldn't ask you for help even if she needed it. You know how she is. But I thought you should know." I thanked her and hung up, but the conversation lingered. I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to my dad lying in a hospital bed, my mom probably pacing the room, and Adam, well, probably doing nothing. I told myself it wasn't my problem, that they'd made their choices, and now they were dealing with the consequences. But the knot in my chest didn't go away. A week later, Karen called again. "Your dad's stable, but he's not out of the woods," she said. "Your mom's a wreck, Ethan. Between the bills and trying to take care of him, she's barely holding it together." I wanted to feel something, anger, sadness, even pity, but all I felt was exhaustion. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Nothing," Karen said quickly. "I'm not asking you to swoop in and save them. I just thought you'd want to know." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to tell her to stop calling, to stop dragging me back into their mess. But the other part of me appreciated her honesty. At least someone in my family was willing to tell me the truth. "Thanks for letting me know," I said finally. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment, staring at the wall. I couldn't stop picturing my dad, gray and worn out, staring out the window of some cramped apartment. I thought about my mom, still making excuses for Adam, and Adam himself, probably playing video games while the rest of the family fell apart. None of it was surprising, but it still left a bitter taste in my mouth. Work kept me distracted, as always. We were on the brink of another major contract, and the pressure to deliver was intense. I started spending even more time at the office, sometimes crashing on the couch in the break room instead of going home. My coworkers joked about how I was married to the job, but they didn't know the half of it. The truth was, work was the only thing keeping me from spiraling. Then, one day, I got a message request on Facebook. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was from Adam. "Hey, Ethan, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I messed up, and I know I let you down. Mom and Dad aren't doing well, and I thought you should know." I stared at the message, a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling up inside me. Sorry? That was it? After everything he'd done, everything he'd taken from me, he thought a half-assed apology would make it better, and now he wanted me to come back and clean up the mess he'd made? I closed the message without responding. I couldn't. What could I possibly say? That it was okay? That I forgave him? Because it wasn't, and I didn't. Not even close. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Adam's words playing over and over in my head. For years, I'd carried the weight of his betrayal, the weight of my parents' choices. I thought I'd left it behind, but it was still there, lingering in the corners of my mind, waiting for moments like this to remind me it hadn't gone away. But as the hours ticked by, one thought kept coming back. I don't owe them anything. Not him. Not them. And for the first time, I believed it. A few weeks passed after Adam's message, and life carried on as usual. Work consumed me, which was just the way I liked it. The company had landed another major deal, and my team was leading the charge on a high-priority project. It was the kind of work that kept me at the office until midnight, poring over lines of code and debugging systems until my eyes burned. but the exhaustion was worth it. Every milestone we hit reminded me that I was building something real, something that mattered. Then Aunt Karen called again. "Ethan, your mom's been asking about you," she said, her voice cautious. "She's not doing well. Between the bills and your dad's health, she's barely keeping it together. And Adam, well, Adam's still Adam." "What does that mean?" I asked, even though I already knew. Karen sighed. "He's not working. He's still living with her, still expecting her to take care of everything. She sold her car last week to cover rent." I felt the familiar wave of frustration rise up, but this time it was mixed with something else. Not pity, exactly, but a kind of weariness. "She's still enabling him," I said flatly. "She doesn't know how to stop," Karen replied. "She's been doing it for so long. She doesn't see any other way." We talked for a little while longer, but when I hung up, I couldn't shake the image of my mom sitting alone in that apartment, drowning under the weight of everything she'd allowed to happen. And Adam, of course, would be there, blissfully oblivious, content to let her sacrifice everything for him. It was pathetic, but it wasn't surprising. That night, I opened my laptop and searched for Adam on social media. I hadn't looked him up in years, but I needed to see for myself what he'd been up to. His Facebook profile was still public, and it didn't take long to find exactly what I was expecting. There he was, sitting on the couch in what I assumed was my parents' apartment, wearing sweatpants and holding a video game controller. The caption read, "Taking it easy. Life's too short to stress." The comments were worse. Friends hyping him up, saying things like, "You deserve it, man," and "Keep grinding, bro." Grinding at what? Leeching off our parents? Destroying everything they'd worked for? I slammed my laptop shut, disgusted. Nothing had changed. He was the same selfish, entitled person he'd always been, and they were still letting him get away with it. For a moment, I considered calling Karen, venting about how ridiculous it all was. But what would that accomplish? She already knew. She was the only one in the family who seemed to see Adam for who he really was. Instead, I went to bed, though sleep didn't come easily. A few months later, Karen called again, this time with an update I didn't expect. "Your dad's back in the hospital," she said. "It's bad, Ethan. The doctors aren't optimistic." I didn't say anything right away. I sat there, gripping the phone, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to get in my car and drive to the hospital to see him one last time. But another part, the part that remembered every slight, every time he'd chosen Adam over me, kept me frozen in place. "Does Mom know you're calling me?" I asked eventually. "She's too proud to ask for help," Karen said. "But Ethan, she's struggling. She doesn't know what to do." "Adam's still there, isn't he?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Karen hesitated. "He's there, but you know how he is. He's not stepping up." I laughed bitterly. "Of course he's not. Why would he? He's never had to. She's spent her whole life cleaning up his messes, and now she wants me to fix it all?" "She hasn't said that," Karen said quickly. "I'm just telling you what's going on. You have a right to know." "Thanks," I said curtly. "I appreciate it." I hung up before she could say anything else. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus. My dad was dying, my mom was drowning, and Adam was... Adam. The thought of going back, of walking into that hospital room and seeing them all again, filled me with a mix of dread and anger. What would I even say? What would they expect me to do? A week later, Karen called with the news I'd been bracing for. "Your dad passed this morning," she said softly. "It was peaceful. Your mom was with him." I sat down on the edge of my bed, her words hitting me harder than I expected. I hadn't seen my dad in years. I hadn't spoken to him since I walked out of their house that night. Now he was gone, and whatever I might have wanted to say to him was gone with him. "Are you okay?" Karen asked after a long silence. "Yeah," I said, though it wasn't true. "Thanks for letting me know." The funeral was small, just family and a few neighbors. I didn't go. I couldn't. The thought of standing there, pretending like we were some kind of united family, made my stomach turn. Karen sent me a picture of the gravesite afterward, a simple marker with my dad's name and dates. It felt strange to see it, like it wasn't real. Life moved on, but the weight of everything lingered. I kept telling myself I'd made the right choice, that staying away was the only way to protect myself. And most of the time, I believed it. But sometimes, late at night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I should have done more. After my dad passed, I thought the updates would stop. What else could Karen possibly tell me? But a few months later, she called again. And from the moment I answered, I knew it wasn't good. "It's your mom," she said. "She's not doing well, Ethan. Losing your dad hit her harder than I expected. She's struggling." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "What does that mean, exactly?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "She's falling apart," Karen said, her voice soft. "Financially, emotionally, everything. She's working 2 part-time jobs just to keep the lights on, and even that's barely enough. And Adam," she trailed off, but she didn't need to finish. I already knew. "Let me guess," I said bitterly. "He's still living with her, contributing nothing." Karen sighed. "More or less. He talks about finding a job, but it's just talk. Your mom's still carrying all the weight." I didn't say anything for a long moment. I wanted to feel angry, at Adam, at my mom, at the whole damn situation, but all I felt was tired. This was what they'd chosen. They'd spent their entire lives enabling Adam, and now they were paying the price. I knew that, but still, something about it gnawed at me. "What does she want from me, Karen?" I asked finally. "Does she think I'm going to swoop in and save the day?" "She hasn't said that," Karen replied quickly. "She hasn't even mentioned asking you for help. I think she's too ashamed to. But Ethan, she's desperate. I can hear it in her voice. Desperate to keep bailing out Adam?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Because that's all she's ever done." Karen didn't argue. "You're not wrong," she said. "But it's more than that. She's alone, Ethan. She doesn't know how to deal with any of this." I thanked Karen for letting me know and hung up, but her words stuck with me. My mom was alone. For the first time, that thought hit differently. Growing up, I'd always seen her as this immovable force, someone who could handle anything, as long as it was for Adam. But now, she was just a person, a tired, overwhelmed person who had no one to lean on. Still, I couldn't bring myself to reach out. What would I even say? That I forgave her? That I was willing to come back into her life and pretend like everything was fine? Because I didn't, and I wasn't. A few weeks later, Karen called again. "Your mom had to move," she said. "She couldn't afford the rent anymore, so she found a smaller place. Just a studio. It's all she could afford." "And Adam?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "He's still with her," Karen said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Though from what I hear, they've been fighting a lot. I think it's finally starting to hit her that he's never going to change." I laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that came from humor. It was bitter, sharp, and full of years of pent-up anger. "It took her this long to figure that out?" I said. Karen didn't respond right away. "People don't always see the truth until it's staring them in the face," she said finally. "And sometimes, not even then." I didn't reply. What was there to say? She wasn't wrong, but it didn't make it any easier to swallow. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment, staring out the window. The city buzzed with life outside, but I felt strangely disconnected from it. My mom had spent her entire life sacrificing everything for Adam, and now she had nothing. No house, no savings, and no support. And Adam was still Adam, oblivious to the wreckage he'd left in his wake. That night, I opened Facebook again, curious to see if Adam had posted anything. His profile was still public, and sure enough, there was a new photo. He was sitting on a bed, probably in the cramped studio apartment, holding a can of soda, with the caption, "Living the dream." I slammed the laptop shut before I could read the comments. I didn't need to see the same enabling nonsense from his friends. He was never going to change, and my mom was never going to stop letting him get away with it. But as much as I wanted to push it all out of my mind, Karen's words kept coming back to me. "She's alone, Ethan. She doesn't know how to deal with any of this." For a fleeting moment, I thought about calling her. I even picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the keypad. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to break the silence I'd worked so hard to maintain. Instead, I put the phone down and went back to work. It was the only thing that made sense anymore. Karen sent me another update a month later. Your mom's trying to get a hold of you, she wrote. She says she just wants to talk. I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. What did she want to say? Was she going to apologize? Beg for forgiveness? Or was she just going to ask for help, hoping I'd step in and fix the mess she'd made? I didn't respond to Karen's message. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't owe her anything. And for the most part, I believed it. But late at night, when the apartment was quiet and there was nothing to distract me, I couldn't stop hearing Karen's voice in my head. She's alone, Ethan. I hated that it bothered me. I hated that a part of me still cared, after everything she'd done, after everything she hadn't done. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the thought. Months passed, and I didn't hear anything. No calls from Karen, no desperate messages from my mom, nothing. I told myself it was a good thing, that the silence meant they'd finally stopped looking to me for answers I didn't have. But late at night, when the world was quiet and I couldn't distract myself with work, the silence felt heavier than I expected. Then, out of nowhere, Karen called again. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as she spoke. Your mom's in the hospital, Ethan. My chest tightened, but I forced my voice to stay steady. What happened? Stress, mostly, Karen said. She collapsed at work. The doctors are running tests, but they think it's exhaustion and malnutrition. She hasn't been taking care of herself. And Adam? I asked, already knowing the answer. Karen sighed. Still Adam. He's been coming and going, but he's not helping. She's barely holding on, Ethan. For a long time, I didn't say anything. I could feel Karen waiting for me to speak, to say I'd rush to the hospital or call my mom, but I couldn't bring myself to make that promise. After everything, after years of being cast aside for Adam, was it even my place to care? She made her choices, I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. She's living with them. Karen didn't argue. She just said, I thought you'd want to know, before hanging up. That night, I sat in my living room, staring at my phone. Part of me wanted to call my mom, to hear her voice and ask her why she'd chosen Adam time and time again, why she hadn't fought for me the way she always fought for him. But another part of me knew I'd never get the answers I wanted. Even if she apologized, even if she begged for forgiveness, it wouldn't undo the years of hurt. It wouldn't change the past. I didn't call. A week later, Karen called with the news I'd been bracing for. Your mom passed away this morning, she said, her voice breaking. She went quietly, Ethan. She wasn't in pain. I sat down, the weight of her words pressing against my chest. My mom was gone. The woman who'd spent her entire life sacrificing for Adam, who'd ignored me when I needed her most, was gone, and I didn't know how to feel. The funeral is this weekend, Karen continued. It's small, just a few people. I thought you might want to come. I thanked her and said I'd think about it, though we both knew I wouldn't. The idea of standing there, pretending to grieve for a woman who'd barely acknowledged me, felt impossible. Instead, I spent the weekend like any other, working on a project for the company and avoiding my phone. After the funeral, Karen called one last time. It was nice, she said, her voice tired. Small but nice. Adam was there, of course. He didn't say much. I think he's finally realizing what he's lost. Has he left yet? I asked, the bitterness creeping into my voice. No, Karen said. He's still staying in her apartment. I don't think he knows what else to do. I laughed, a short, hollow sound. Of course he doesn't. He's never had to figure anything out for himself. Karen didn't respond, and after a long silence, she said, I just wanted you to know. I won't bother you again, Ethan. You're not bothering me, I said, though I wasn't sure if it was true. Thanks for keeping me in the loop. After we hung up, I felt strangely empty. My mom was gone, my dad was gone, and Adam, well, Adam would always be Adam. The chapter of my life that had been defined by their chaos was finally over, but it didn't feel like closure. It just felt like an ending. In the months that followed, I threw myself even deeper into work. Our company was expanding rapidly, and my role had grown with it. I was traveling to meet investors, leading development teams, and finally earning the kind of salary that made all the late nights and early mornings feel worth it. On paper, my life was perfect, but sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself thinking about my parents, about Adam, about everything that had happened. Did I regret walking away? Sometimes. But even if I'd stayed, even if I tried to fix things, I knew it wouldn't have changed anything. My parents had made their choices, and I'd made mine. And for the first time, I wasn't ashamed of the life I'd built. One day, I got an email from Karen. It was short, just a few lines. "I'm proud of you, Ethan. You've done so well for yourself. Your parents didn't always see it, but I hope you know how much you deserve their pride. Take care of yourself." I didn't reply right away. I didn't know what to say. But later that night, as I sat in my quiet apartment, I typed out a simple response: "Thank you. That means more than you know." Sometimes, people say family is everything. But I've learned that family is only everything if they treat you like you matter. If they don't, you're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to build a life that's yours, even if it means leaving them behind. That's what I did. And for all the pain and anger, for all the things I'll never fully heal from, I've never regretted it. Not once.